All right, thanks, Anne. I'm Molly McCammon. I'm Executive Director of the Alaska Ocean Observing System and one of the 3 co-chairs of the Environmental Intelligence Collaboration Team, along with Candace Nachman and Roberto Delgado. This is a joint meeting with the Environmental Intelligence Team, plus the Marine Ecosystem Team and the Coastal Resilience Collaboration Teams. So I want to welcome everybody here. This is the 3rd year, actually, we've been doing this. We started it in about 3 years ago in the spring, trying to get together all of the leads of all of the research cruises going up into the Arctic, into the Bering, Chukchi, and Beaufort Seas, and sharing what the science and the research plans were for those research cruises, and exploring if there were opportunities for collaboration. For example, if you're going up at a certain time, can you take water samples for my project that might be earlier in the year? And it was something I think that was really positive for all of the researchers on those cruises and has created a greater sense of community in terms of the research community. And we hope also providing more information out to coastal communities in Alaska about what those plans are. So those are done in the spring before the season starts, before the open water season. And then also later in the fall, what happened with your cruises? What did you see of particular interest? What do you think your future plans might be? And of course, this year was very unusual because of COVID and all of the restrictions on travel and cruises. We also included a more expanded research cruise status report and update that Anne Christine and Jill Pruitt put together and circulated that. So later on in the meeting, after we hear from some of the results of the research cruises, we'll be talking a little bit about that cruise update and whether it was useful, what people would like to see different, and how we might change that over time. But again, I just wanted to say this is our 3rd year of doing this, of getting the team together beforehand and then after to kind of summarize what they found out, and also an opportunity to hear from those out in coastal communities who basically are our first responders. You all, and I'm really glad to see so many of you joining in by phone into this meeting. You really are the eyes and ears. You see things first, you know the area the most intimately year round, and it's really incredibly valuable, your insights and what you see happening out in those areas. So with that, that's the purpose of this meeting. And we do have, there's in the agenda, there's also a number of links to all of our teams and what we're working on and what the activities are. And all of the presentations and the meeting notes will be available on the website and available to everyone. Or if you want them sent directly to your email, just let Anne Christine know and she can do that as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Anne Christine, who is going to kind of introduce all of our speakers and the presentations today. So did any of the other collaboration team leads want to say anything?
This is Jackie Grebmeier. I know Danielle is there too with her daughter, budding graduate student. We would like to welcome you here. Kathy Kuhn is the 3rd in the co-leads, and it's great having this opportunity to present and find out more about all the different cruises that went on in 2020. Thanks, Molly.
Yeah, and hi everyone. This is Colleen Strawhacker with the Coastal Resilience Collaboration Team, co-lead with John Pierce and Amy Holman. Thanks everyone for joining, and for Molly for providing an excellent introduction to the call. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Molly for the introduction. We have a lot of presentations, well, not a lot, but a couple of presentations today, and we're going to start with Bob Boyd, who's going to talk about all the NOAA NIMS cruises and the Oscar Dyson cruises. We're then going to switch to Bill Williams, who's going to talk about the AON-BGOS mission, then switching over to John Nelson about the Canada's 3 oceans. Then Jackie is going to get a very in-depth presentation on a variety of cruises, because we had a couple of people, especially in the from the Korean sector and the Japanese sector, that weren't able to attend the meeting because of the time difference. So Jackie volunteered, or I volunteered her to present on those cruises as well. And we're ending with Kate Stafford, who's going to talk about the glider surveys. So I'm going to hand it over to Bob so we can get started.
Great. Thanks very much, Anne-Christine. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Molly. Appreciate the opportunity to share our 2020 field season and touch on our 2021 field season. I'll be pretty brief here, so if there's some questions, we could go into some more detail. As you know, our 2020 field season was dramatically truncated because of the pandemic. So I'm going to focus on 2 or 3 of the larger research projects that we were able to get underway. In addition to these, we had a number of smaller projects where we were able to work with coastal communities, but they didn't fall under our large surveys here. So we're just going to focus on the big surveys here. I've got this top line here, March through June 15th, quite a bit of laboratory research associated with the Arctic. We wanted to highlight that a little bit here, where we assessed some work on the potential for oil spills in the Arctic. We looked at ocean acidification in the Arctic, forage fish overwintering, survival studies in the Arctic. So these are projects that went on, many of them in the laboratory, but focused in the Arctic region. In July, I'll focus on our project where we put 3 sail drones in the water, took some acoustic surveys. And then lastly, I'll touch on the Oscar Dyson survey that was able to go forward from August through the end of September. Okay, so first of all, let me touch on the 2020 uncrewed surface vehicle survey. So early on in the pandemic, we realized that we had the potential to have our surveys negatively impacted. So right away, almost in March, we started putting together a project to put some sail drones in the water. For those, I'll go into a little bit of detail here, but for those of you who don't know, these sail drones are uncrewed vessels. They're automated vessels, remote control. They're on the surface of the water. They're not in the air. They're on the surface of the water, and they consist of a large sail. They're a drone. And we wanted to make sure that we collected our most important acoustics information. That information gives us backscatter from the water column, which gives us information on our most important commercial fishery in the pollock in the Bering Sea. So the purpose for this in 2020 was a contingency plan, given the disruptions that were likely coming. We had 3 sail drones set up, working with the sail drone company. And we had talked about a number of different ways of making this happen, and the way to do it most effectively in the pandemic was to sail them directly from Alameda, California, which, if you look at that map, kind of seemed crazy at first, that we were going to put these drones on the water and sail them all the way north in order to conduct the survey, but it went extremely well. We sailed them to Alaska. It took over a month to get them here. Then we conducted a survey, and during the daylight hours, the echo sounders that are on the sail drones are calibrated, so the data has the scientific integrity that we need for management. And then we included a number of oceanographic and meteorological sensors as well. So we worked with our partners at Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory, where we worked with the Sail Drone Organization, and put on whatever we could as fast as we could so we could collect information. The meteorological data was sent back real time in some respects to help National Weather Service, and in others, oceanographic data was collected along the way. The only reason this was feasible, and the reason this doesn't necessarily work everywhere, is because of how the backscatter works in the Bering Sea. because it's a relatively unique area with respect to pollock. Not a lot of other species to worry about in terms of misunderstanding what that backscatter is. So if your question is, why don't we do this everywhere? It's because we have a pretty unique situation here. But we are trying to work on using these drones in other regions. We also have a long history of comparing drone type data, acoustic data, to data collected on vessels. And that'll become more important here in a moment. So the dates of this survey were July 4th through August 20th, if you include the entire ship time. So challenges. It's a robot. It's not a ship, so we can't put people on it. All we were able to do is put sensors on this. We were not able to conduct the usual trawls that we have. And the reason that's important is we collect information on what species are under the boat. We collect information on how big the fish are under the boat. And so we weren't able to get any of that this year. All we got back was this backscatter, this sound, just like a fancy fish finder, and not biomass. Larger acoustic dead zones. So this has to do with the area that we're not able to collect information near the bottom of the ocean. And in order to do this in a timely manner and get the information back for fisheries management, we had to space our transects wider than we usually would for an acoustic system. So some results. So what this figure shows from 1994 through, looks like I can put a, let's get my highlighter here. My highlighter from 1994 through 2020, this shows pollock biomass in millions of tons. And this is the acoustic survey biomass. So typically we do this with a ship. And then the last data point in 2020, this is the sail drone. So what you can see is that the biomass of pollock using just this tool fluctuates quite a bit, dropped down in the mid-2000s. And the number this year in 2020 was right in the middle between 2016 and 2018. We do this every other year. So things went extremely well. You'll notice that the error bars on this dot are higher than previous years, and that's because of the spacing of our survey. So the data are not as accurate as we would get from the vessel, but still extremely valuable for our management. The data was processed the same way that we usually do, and I mentioned the uncertainty. So our estimate this year from just these values was about 3.6 million tons. This represents about a 44% increase from what we saw in 2018. And overall, once you take this data point and put it into the model incorporates lots of information about all the data that we've collected over the years on pollock. We saw about a 14% decrease in pollock abundance in the Bering Sea between 2019 and 2020. So moving on to our other successful mission this year, this was an incredible joint effort with PMEL, Alaska Fisheries Science Center, academic partners. Jackie Grebmeier on here was the chief scientist, Phyllis Stavino, the lead for PMEL. Really a great accomplishment, and one that took many different turns long before the vessel left the beach. We did everything in our power to collect data this year. Lots of people working together to collect information for each other. We very much, at the Alaska Science Center, very much appreciate all of our partners and colleagues in this. And I'm sure I won't do justice in everything that was collected, but I'll touch on it. So this was, again, a multi-group effort here. The survey went from late August to late September. From Seattle, and then ended officially in Kodiak before the vessel continued back to Seattle. The goal was to pick up our priorities associated with a distributed biological observatory. Jackie will touch on that in a bit. Also, the goal was to continue our time series. We call this our Eco Foci time series. And this is a combination of physical oceanographic variables like temperature, salinity, water column information, and the biological data with the lower trophic levels of phytoplankton, zooplankton, and then some upper trophic levels as well, as we're able to collect those data. So we wanted to continue that time series. We also incorporated our moorings cruise, which is led by PMEL in a typical year. And the goal was to work with our 25 different moorings to either replace them, swap them out, collect the data from them, and continue the process that we usually do. So we crammed about 5 different typical surveys into one vessel for 1 month. We had some issues along the way, but it was a great success in the year of the pandemic. So standard measurements collected during this included some physical data. We had CTDs, pulled the moorings up, and there were also some pop-up buoys that were deployed. These are deployed to collect information from the water column. This figure here, if you can see it, and the presentation is on the IARPA Collaboration's website, but you can see the track lines through the Bering Sea, to Chukchi, up into the edge of the Beaufort here and back. You can see that the different stations of blue dots represent moorings that were worked on. Triangles here represent pop-up buoys that were put in, and crosses represent stations where information was collected about the water column. And again, you'll hear more about that in a moment. In the water column information, data were collected on nutrients, oxygen, chlorophyll, harmful algal blooms, some eDNA data was collected, zooplankton data, and then some seabird surveys. So did our best to get a snapshot of the ecosystem during this survey. Accomplishments from this overall survey, again, pretty incredible for getting this out. About 6,000 kilometers traveled, 25 days at sea. We sampled 5 of the DBO sites. 20 of the moorings were completed, about 68 CTDs, a number of different genetic samples and water column samples for HABs, about 50 zooplankton tows. We also were successful at picking up echo sounders that had been deployed in previous years along the US-Russian boundary. These are on the bottom of the ocean looking up and helping us understand what pelagic species move across the border. You may have heard me speak in previous presentations or others at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center. We've been tracking a large portion of the pollock stock that moves back and forth into Russian and US waters, upwards of 20+% of the stock in some years. So those moorings were successfully retrieved, and those data will be pulled out of those moorings and analyzed in the coming year. Lastly, I'm showing a slide here for catechulics from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so these are the results from the seabird and marine mammal observations that were made during the survey. You can see in this little graphic here in the middle, this is Chukchi Sea, Northern Bering Sea, Southeastern Bering Sea, and Gulf of Alaska. The size of the bar represents the number of birds per kilometer. So you can see that most of the birds cited during the survey were in the southeastern Bering Sea. The map on the upper left-hand side, anytime you see the large circles, that's where the highest concentrations of the seabirds were. In terms of species, most of those species were shearwaters, 2 different kinds of shearwaters. They represented 78% of all the birds, and they're migrating up from New Zealand and Australia. And overwintering in Alaska. So you can again see where the highest, the largest dots represent the largest number of birds. Then we had 3 different species of auklets. Again, the largest dots represent the highest concentration. And then lastly, marine mammals were cited along the way as well. So there's some information you can see yellow here on the top. These are walrus. We've got humpback whales throughout. Minke whales, fin whales, gray whales, beluga whales, and then some unidentified whales as well. So that information there. Very quickly here, just touch on what our plans are for 2021. So we're doing our best to get back on the water in 2021. Our expectation is that we will try to do all of our surveys that we would typically do in an odd year, odd being 2021. But also recognize that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. We're very hopeful that vaccines will be present so that we can get all of our data collected in 2021. But we remain being very careful about the health of the communities, the health of those working with us on the vessels and our staffing. But our expectations are that early in the spring, we'll be able to conduct our marine mammal surveys in the Beaufort Sea via aircraft. The Oscar Dyson, the intention is to go out on an early moorings cruise. This is mostly PMEL, but also working with our ecofoci and those lower trophic levels I mentioned before. It's unclear as to whether the Coast Guard vessel, the Healy, will be back in operation by the end of next year. So we've got that here as a TBD, to be determined whether or not we'll be able to either look at other charters or use that vessel to conduct some of the work in July through August on the DBO lines and some of the ecofoci and HABs work. We're expecting to conduct our bottom trawl surveys in May, as we usually would. Those are focused mostly in the southeastern Bering Sea. We've also committed to the northern Bering Sea for 2021. There's been a large push to have our surveys continue in the northern Bering Sea, given the number of commercial species that have gone into that region and the need to focus on that ecosystem. So we will definitely be there in 2021, and our hope is to be there annually from here on out as a new baseline survey in that region. We're focused in August on trying to get our northern Chukchi Sea integrated survey done. Moving into the ecosystem surveys in that region, and then our ecosystem survey in the northern Bering Sea on the Northwest Explorer, and finishing up with our ecosystem work in Oscar Dyson in late September. So Anne-Christine, that's all I've got for you today. Appreciate everybody's time and the opportunity to provide this information.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, this season was definitely very tricky, and I appreciate everyone sending me continuous updates on the cruises. There's a question from Hayo, and I think we can take one question before popping over. But Bill, if you want to start sharing your screen while Bob answers the question.
Okay.
It's from Hayo, saying, in any of these surveys, is there information exchange or collaboration with Russia to help improving stock estimates?
Excellent question, Hayo. I appreciate it. I would not say there is annual information exchange, but we try on a regular basis to work with our colleagues on the Russian side, both from a formal perspective through bilateral negotiations, as well as through personal interactions with the scientists on the Russian side to collect, to compare, to share information. We have 2 publications coming out with our Russian colleagues on pollock, juvenile and lower trophic level distributions in the Bering Sea. We're also trying this year to get some additional information on what's going on with fisheries on the Russian side in the Bering, northern Bering, and in particular in what's going on with the Chukchi Sea. So hopefully we'll be successful this year. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Will, you're currently in presenter mode, so we can see your notes too.
You can see my notes. Okay. I don't have any notes. Let's try.
Oh, there you go. Now we can see. Okay, now I can see your screen.
You could. Okay, it doesn't look right on my screen. That's the thing. But does this look okay for everybody? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Fine.
That does it for me then. I will simply make it do that. Well, thank you for asking me to present here. I'm presenting on the 2020 Joint Ocean Ice Study expedition on the Louis Saint Laurent. That's the name of the study in Canada. In the US, it's the Arctic Observing Network's Beaufort Gyre Observing System. And this is a collaboration between the USA and Canada on board the Louis Saint Laurent that has been ongoing since 2003. So it's created and supported by the National Science Foundation, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and then scientists at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Yale, and where I am at the Institute of Ocean Sciences. And so this is Andrei Proshetinsky at Woods Hole with Rick Critchfield beginning the program. And now Isabella Lebras is heading up the program from Woods Hole, and Mary Louise has been from Yale, has been part of the program for a long time and is also leading it. This 2020 was our 18th year, and we're funded until 2024. There's a picture of the ship deploying and the Woods Hole team deploying a ice-tethered profiler in 2019. The program samples the Beaufort Gyre in the southern Canada basin of the Arctic Ocean. Can you see my cursor moving around?
Yes.
Okay, so these are our standard stations with our station names, and the primary objective of this program is to quantify the freshwater content of the Beaufort Gyre each year. Since this, if you take the sea ice off the top of the Arctic Ocean, what you would see is this huge accumulation of freshwater in this Beaufort Gyre region here that also extends over onto the Northwind Ridge. And so we're very much collaborative with ships that go into this area here too for our calculations. And I was quite interested to hear that this is a forum for collaboration. As the Canadian lead of the expedition, I'm somewhat open for business in that this is a big ship, and if there are samples or scientific programs that could come aboard that would not incur ship time, or if they incur ship time would provide those ship time funds, then give me a call and we'll talk and see if it's already being done or if it would be a good addition. We aim to not only study the fresh water, but also study the geochemistry, the water mass structure, now the heat content of the various water masses from the Pacific and the Atlantic, and look at the ecosystem all the way up to zooplankton. This year, because of the pandemic, everyone boarded in Newfoundland, and it was a Canadian-only expedition that took 6 weeks from Newfoundland to go around the Beaufort Gyre and then to go back to Newfoundland again. The expedition itself took place from around the 15th of September to the 1st of October. This seems to have become this fall timing is our standard time at the moment. And this cruise track map shows all the different samples that we did, including 60 CTDs, 33 bongo tows, XCTDs to fill in the gaps between the CTDs, 2 sites to deploy ice buoys, ice tethered profilers from Woods Hole Oceanographic, and sea ice mass balance buoys from Dartmouth. We were also quite lucky this year to recover 4 ice tethered profilers that had stopped functioning. This is a bonus. Ice tethered profilers are not made to be recovered, but at the end of their life, if we can get them, then that's good for that program. Everyone's seen this a lot, but this is just to say that this year there was sea ice in the Beaufort Gyre region in the Canada Basin. It was not a near ice-free expedition like it was in 2012. There's this tongue of young multi-year ice stretching around in the same direction of the Beaufort Gyre. The total sea ice extent lay between the recent maximum minimums and the record minimum of 2012. So what do we sample? This is a list I made for the Pacific Arctic Group and the Synoptic Arctic Survey. It has, we have a 24 bottle rosette with 10-liter Niskins, measuring a full suite of electronic sensors, including through Salinga-GAN, colored dissolved organic matter fluorometer. We take geochemistry samples, a standard range, dissolved oxygen, all the nutrients, oxygen 18 isotope in water to look at sea ice and river inputs, alkalinity, dissolved inorganic carbon, chlorophyll A, bacteria, and microbial diversity from Connie Lovejoy and David Walsh, and then fluorescent dissolved organic matter again from Salinga-GAN. Then also we're tracing both Fukushima radiation and traces from nuclear reprocessing plants in Europe with John Smith from DFO and Nuria from ETH Zurich. Here are the buoy deployments that we did just to show a little bit of data. The Woods Hole team was not allowed on the ship this year because of the pandemic, and so the Institute of Ocean Sciences team was instructed as to how to do this, and those deployments were successful. And these are some data from the first deployment, which drifted towards the Canadian Arctic archipelago, and recorded some extremely warm Pacific summer water as it went along. And then these are the recoveries of 4 expired ice tether profilers. Next slide. We do underway measurements as well. In particular here, we have a PCO2 system from Mike de Grandpré at the University of Montana. And we take surface DIC, alkalinity, and fluorescent dissolved organic matter. We are fairly thin on meteorological data collected. We have an AVOS weather station which works, but we do not have a meteorological tower at the bow of the ship, which is something that would be a good addition. Sea ice observations were fairly minimal this year, but they were done by the Canadian Ice Service, who were on board, and also by forward-looking and downward-looking cameras, and then the expendable CTDs. We're showing here the underway data. This warm water, underway is about 8 meters deep for the Louis Saint Laurent. This warm water is an error. They were using steam to clean out a nearby pipe. This fresh water here is almost certainly the Mackenzie River water. We were not able to run alkalinity on board this year. When those samples are run, we will almost certainly discover that this is the Mackenzie River water this year that came from the Mackenzie River Delta and got pushed by both the circulation and wind-driven circulation over in this direction. And at the same time, fresher water that would otherwise be in Amundsen Gulf appears to have been pushed out of Amundsen Gulf. Let's see. So from Rick Critchfield creates a freshwater content plot each year showing the Beaufort Gyre and how much fresh water there is relative to these salinity of 34.8 in the Atlantic layer. So the Pacific origin water and the river water contribute to this. And the gyre appears to have spread out a little bit this year. There is a very, very long anticipated relaxation of the Beaufort gyre, wherein this fresh water perhaps goes through the Canadian Arctic archipelago and around Greenland to cause one of the great salinity anomalies in the Atlantic. We've been waiting for that for a long time. The Beaufort gyre has, if you use Andrei Kroshetinsky's Arctic AOO, Arctic Ocean Oscillation Index, it has been anticyclonic for a very long time, and it's overdue to be cyclonic, which would be the mode in which this anticyclonic gyre releases fresh water. Looking at the Pacific water, we can track these water masses each year, and it's interesting that in 2020, there is this very warm, near 2 degrees C Pacific summer water in the northern gyre that has presumably flowed in this fashion around the Beaufort gyre. Very different to 2018 and 2019, thanks to Birgit Rogella, a student who was on the ship and made these plots during the expedition. So coming back to the fresh water in the gyre, these are some time series plots made by Sarah Zimmerman here at DFO of the fresh water in the gyre, showing its increase since 2002 up to 2008, and then its variability since then, perhaps an all-time maximum in around 2018 and a slight decrease for 2020. We can split this up into surface water, freshwater, Pacific summer water, and Pacific winter water, and showing changes in the amounts of different kinds of water in the gyre. And if you go over to this plot, the blue line shows the Pacific summer water gradually increasing over time. Pacific winter water staying roughly constant in its amount of fresh water, and the surface waters changing a fair amount under varying surface forcing.
Not to interrupt, but I just wanted to check where you are in your presentation to make sure that we're kind of staying on time.
How long did I take so far?
12 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a sort of thank you slide here. That's the crew and the scientists, a small team this year who started out in the pandemic, and then 2 weeks into the cruise decided that everything was okay. So at least on that ship. So they had a small pandemic-free time before coming home. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Does anyone have a quick question, a burning question right now? If not, if you can stop sharing your screen, then John can take over and share his screen. Hello, John.
Hi. Am I sharing?
If you could share your screen, that'd be great. Yes.
I'm trying. It doesn't. I'm having an issue with my internet connection.
Okay. I can share my screen if that's easier.
Can you show my talk? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just opening the
Okay.
presentation.
Hopefully I dropped the call earlier, so hopefully it'll stick with the presentation. Okay. Is that working?
I can see the slides.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm John Nelson. I work for Fisheries Oceans Canada in Institute of Ocean Sciences in Sydney. I'm going to give a quick report regarding the Sir Wilfrid Laurier cruise that happened this year. Because of the pandemic and because we have so many people coming from the US, we were unable to have the full cruise that we typically would have that goes from Victoria, BC to Barrow, Alaska. And not only we had a reduced number of people and activities on the ship, but the ship left about a month later than typical. Next slide. Okay, so typically, this survey has been going on since the late 90s, starting with Jackie and Lee working in the Bering Sea, and then that morphed into the Canada's Three Oceans Distributed Biological Observatory after that, and that's been continuing on since as this Canada's Three Oceans since 2007, I believe. So this is the typical track where we leave Victoria, BC, cross the Gulf of Alaska, go through Dutch Harbor, across the Bering Sea shelf, up into the Chukchi, and the cruise of Barrow. So I'm just going to tell you what we were able to do off this ship this year. And the only science that was aboard the ship this year was done by the crew and a couple hydrographers that were heading up there to do some work up in the Arctic. Next slide, please. Okay, so this year we did XCTDs and Argo floats deployments across the Gulf of Alaska. Continuously, we did underway temperature, salinity, and fluorescence. That went from Victoria to Barrow and beyond. And I believe Bill will talk a little bit about what the ship did on Humphrey Melling's cruise after Barrow. We also deployed a continuous plankton recorder, and I'll show you the locations of those two tows. And we had a mooring recovery in the Chukchi Sea. Next slide, please. Okay, so this just shows the panel below with the blue dots, the location where the XCTDs were deployed. And above that is the black circles is where the Argo floats were deployed. And this showing temperature, salinity, and TS plot of the XCTDs. Next slide, please. Okay, underway measurements in 2020, temperature, salinity, and fluorescence. This is it's an almost yearly record. We have typically crossing this transect in July, so we have good time series for that now. I'm not going to get into it too much today. Next slide, please. Okay, and this just shows 2018, 2019, 2020 for the underway temperature and salinity. But note that 2020 was a month later, so we really can't compare 2018, 2019 to 2020. Next slide, please. But it is interesting to come through a month later and see if there might be any differences from what we would typically see going through the area in July. And you see here, this is fluorescence, and note that south of Bering Strait, there's in 2018, 2019, there's a hot spot of fluorescence. That's not there a month later in 2020 and is found further north of Bering Strait. Next slide, please. This shows where we deploy the continuous plankton recorder. And for those of you not familiar with the continuous plankton recorder, it's a tow body that's towed behind the ship that has a small aperture in the front. Water passes through. That water passes through a silk screen that's swirling continuously, that's driven by a mechanical device on the instrument. And so that creates a continuous record of plankton collections as the ship is progressing. And here we show, so the first tow we did went from Dutch Harbor to just west or east of St. Lawrence Island. And then we started, or the ship started another tow that went from the stopping point of the first tow just to where we did a mooring recovery, gemsec mooring of Point Hope. So as far as I know, this is the first time the continuous plankton recorder has been towed through Bering Strait. And we ended up with over 800 miles of a continuous record of the plankton. Next slide, please. So this slide is what we typically would do on this cruise. And as has been previously mentioned, we're hopeful that we'll be able to do this again in 2021. But the breakdown is going across the Gulf of Alaska, use CTDs and ex-CTDs during the transit, CTD rosettes and bongo net casts across the Gulf, underway systems continuously running. Typically we deploy Argo floats, and then we have primary production on board to estimate primary productivity. After Dutch Harbor, there's some stations that we occasionally heading up onto the shelf. Typically we steam straight from Dutch Harbor right to DBO1 and start working DBO1 to DBO5. And on those cruises, we have Jackie and Lee doing benthic sampling, Van Veen, Grabs and Habs core, CTT and water sampling, and bongo tows. Typically, we would have seabird and marine mammal observations, Kathy Kulitz doing the seabirds stuff, and Sue Moore. I'm not sure what Sue's doing now these days, if she's still going to be involved, but typically she'd be the one leading the marine mammal observations. And then again, we do primary production, incubations, continuous plankton recorder, and if possible or necessary, mooring recoveries. So at this time, it's not clear if we're going to be able to do this. We're all hopeful that things will come together and we'll be able to do the typical Canada's Three Oceans distributed biological observatory cruise that's shown here. And that's all I have. Oh, and then Bill, I think you have a couple slides that regarding Humphrey Melling's leg, what Laurier does east of Barrow.
Yeah, if I could share my screen for 1 or 2 slides, what do you think?
Do I need to de-share?
You will.
No, I already sharing.
Good. Okay.
I will share. So I'll just show this slide that goes from the Sir Wilfrid Laurier has to go home, and Humphrey Melling does the science on that return trip, and it's a mooring turnaround expedition. These are the moorings that were turned around this year by 2 technicians that were on board. Humphrey Melling was at home being chief scientist at the same time. An obvious focus on the Amundsen Gulf, DBO8 here at Cape Bathurst, the Canadian Beaufort Shelf. Another upwelling hotspot at Herschel Island in Mackenzie Trough. And then this mooring, this Arctic Ice Monitoring Mooring, I think that's what AIM stands for, which has been a long-term mooring in collaboration with NOAA. So I wanted to point that out, and that's pretty much it for that. That's all I need to say here. Thanks.
Thank you. If you can stop sharing your screen, then we can hop over to Jackie. And does anyone have any immediate questions? Awesome. I can see the screen.
You can see that?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to give a presentation that combines some of the other of our Asian colleagues in there too, and also a slide of Rebecca Woodgate's Bering Strait mooring. I know she's on the line, so she could say something if she likes. But basically, the cruise that I was going to focus in initially is on the DBO and the AON, which you can see all the acronyms here, but it was jointly done to do the DBO work in October with a combination with the benthic sampling, and also included putting in a sediment trap with the eco-foci program and another mooring southwest of St. Lawrence Island, the DBO. And then I'll also be presenting some of Seth Danielson, who's also on the line, so he can say a few things or he can answer all the questions. And then I'll also present some of the work from Sung Ho and Ijin Yang's AON work from Korea and Shie's work from Japan. So you've seen this figure, and I think you all have an expanded version that you do as part of this collaborative effort, but I wanted to highlight in red what I'm going to briefly provide to you. We did have our Pacific Arctic Group fall meeting last week, and the PowerPoints and presentations from that will be on the PAG website. But I would point out that the chair moved from China, Jingfeng He, to Canada, and Bill Williams, who just spoke previous to John, is the new chair of the Pacific Arctic Group for the next 2 years. So I will present, I'll start off with the Norseman 2 and then basically go backwards up through the line. So for the DBO, the work that we did on the Norseman 2 is from October 2 to 22. We were able to go out of Nome and back into Nome on the Norseman 2. They had a COVID plan and an agreement with the state of Alaska and the city of Nome. And we quarantined both at our home institutions as well as when we were up in Anchorage, and then a contract flight up to Nome, truck to get to the ship. So we never interacted with the community, and then came back on commercial flight. But as everybody knows, we looked at the, for the DBO program and also eco-foci and working with the biodiversity work of AON, we're looking at status and change. And a lot of this work I'm going to show you is, and that we put out moorings and so forth, are time series studies. And as I said, we turned around the, not an MS, an M8 mooring down here for Phyllis Stabenow and the gang from PMEL for southwest of St. Lawrence, but we had NPRB funding to put in a new sediment trap. So that is in the water now. And also with Seth Danielson, the Chukchi Environmental Observatory. In combination with this is the AON work, and we're able to do eDNA work on water measurements. So briefly, we did temperature and salinity. As I said, we turned the moorings around. We had nutrients and oxygen 18 were collected. Those are in the laboratory now. Chlorophyll was processed, shipped aboard. eDNA so we have a little bit of data on that coming out. The eDNA work is under the AON program, and also with the University of Washington and NOAA. To look at the water measurements for that, microbial, as well as being able to use it for potentially for fish tracking. Zooplankton abundance and biomass, Russ Hopcroft from the AON project, and then we did macrobenthus abundance. Lee Cooper did the nutrients and oxygen work. We also collaborated for harmful algal blooms, so we did collections of sediments and dominant clams and worms for Don Anderson and Catherine Lefebvre at NOAA, and Don at Woods Hole, and those samples went back to them and being processed. We also looked at carbon and sediments and benthic oxygen uptake that Christina Gaithel for her PhD program. So this is what we did. We actually started out and went north because of the weather, and I would say in October, those of you who've been out there, you do the weather window, and the smaller the ship, you look at your weather quite a bit. But so we went north instead. We worked with the local community, Nutjavik, and also the AWC to make sure when we sampled close, that we did this when they were on hunting, because they were back into the hunting mode, started in August for bowhead and continued on into October. But fortuitously, this period of time here, the weather was such that we managed to go through the window while they also were not out hunting. Wainwright went back to hunt, and as did Barrow. And then we came back down, worked the DBO3. We added stations as part of that we normally do on the Laurier. And you'll see the value of doing those, actually, these latitudinal ones. Then we went down, did the mooring work, and then came back after some hiding here when there were 60 knot winds going and 20-foot seas that we didn't want to be in. And then we came and worked the DBO2 area. We also put in a Bering Strait line. So just briefly, just showing you one slide. And this one actually, unlike what I showed last week, is just focused on the Bering Strait region, because this is where we actually saw the moderate levels of a bloom, which surprised us. Most of you know that the water is still pretty warm, up by 5 degrees in the southeast Chukchi Sea here. So this is off Point Hope, DBO3, running from there, from Point Hope out to the date line here. We did see some, but pretty low levels of chlorophyll. This is just the fluorescence off of the sensor, and the actual chlorophyll numbers are actually still being plotted up. But I wanted to point out to you that when we got over into just south and we ran this UTN line that we normally do in July only on the Laurier, this is where we picked up moderate levels on this side, particularly the station right in here, just north of Bering Strait. So besides having these warm surface waters, typical cold saline waters, we had these moderate levels of production from the surface down to about 30 meters. And so this was approximately 120 milligrams per meter square integrated, which is pretty good for that time of year. And it occurred, we also saw some of this activity going on at about 15 meters in the Bering Strait region. This is to remind me too, so for the fall season, we didn't expect to see those levels, and it was quite interesting on the vessel when we're analyzing the data with the nutrients. I just want to point out, when we're working Bering Strait, we were competing with the long line fishing. Well, we weren't competing, except that the captain was making sure we weren't going to connect up with their hooks. They were out there fishing for Pacific cod and pollock, which most of you all know is already moving up and through they were out there up to Bering Strait. We also saw a lot of fishing vessels over in the Gulf of Anadyr, and the Russian side has opened up their commercial fishing on the western side of the Chukchi. So at the same time we were seeing these long line fishing vessel, we also saw a large cargo ship started in Quebec and was going over to Asia, over 400 foot. So there's activity while we were out there in October. So it's just something that we all are going to be seeing more and more, I believe. One interesting point here, and I didn't see Bob give his presentation. So this is from Bob Pickard. He just got off the Sekuliak in November. Primarily, he worked some of the DBO lines, but primarily was working up in the Beaufort. But what we're seeing here from Seth's, who had the lead on the CTD, this is the Bering Strait temperatures. And you go from surface down to the bottom, you see how red they are, pretty warm, 4.5, 5 degrees in October, starting to pull down, but still 3.5 degrees in the Bering Strait when Bob was passing through just a week and a half or 2 weeks ago through the, so it's cooling down. The ice still hasn't come back on that, but it's coming down. The other thing we did is, this is Seth Danielson's lead on the Chukchi Ecosystem Observatory. So we're able to turn around that mooring, which also actually has sediment traps, but you can see all the data streams that are on that. So it's all these different sensors from ice draft to PAR, velocity, fluorescence, backscatter, sediment trap. Those sediment trap phytoplankton and zooplankton are coming back at this time. POC, acoustic backscatter. What's exciting is that next year there will be a benthic time-lapse camera put on that under the Ambon and CEO and Alaska Ocean Observing System with collaboration in that part. So on the left here, you can see this is 6 years that Seth and the team have on hand. They're funded through 2024. They also have added eDNA analysis through their water sampler, which is on the mooring array. As I said, the benthic lapse, time-lapse camera, which would be great and something that would be nice to put on the new one we have south of St. Lawrence Island. And if you have any interest in the contact, or if you're stopping by on any of your cruises, get a hold of Seth, because calibrations, we do actually do that when we go up on the Laurier cruise. As John mentioned, we have one of our stations right there and we do a calibration cast, and I can share that data. So if anybody's going past that line, get a hold of Seth for and talking about that information. One piece of data that Seth brought forward, this is the emerging results. They're looking at some of the sensors of fish and zooplankton evaluating that across tidal, intertidal timescales, and looking at the relation to backscatter. And you can see some of the fish is in blue and the cycles in here, and the zooplankton is in orange. And then what he's got here is the temperature. So the variance between sea ice, obviously higher the temperature, the lower the sea ice. And then this is the record on salinity. I'd just like to point out the sediment trap work, Catherine Lalonde, who's out of Edmondson Science. We were also successfully able, she is running the sediment trap or the collections, doing the analysis on that. And many of them actually are being done in collaboration down here at the Chesapeake Biolab. But we're also fortunate to get funding from NPRB and have a trap now on the DBO south of St. Lawrence Island, and she's involved with that. So we put that trap in the water during the Norseman 2. I would just point out that what the sediment traps do that we can't, because we don't go out there that many times over the winter time, this is September over to April. This is a recent publication, one that she is preparing now, but has this from one of the Asgard, program that they had. But you can see the zooplankton, but there's still activity going on, but there's a time difference. You know, the spring bloom, as you can see, June, July, and August. But look what's happening September, October, November, December. There's still a lot of, which means there's a lot of export material that are keeping these guys on the bottom fed throughout that fall period, through the winter and up into the spring. So a lot of activity that's picked up on that, using that mooring array in the sediment trap data. I wanted to point this out. This is from the Seth's nearshore temperature. Primarily what they were seeing when we pulled that up, this was in 2019, actually, the record, it was deployed in 2019, the highest temperature on record. We retrieved it in October in this period here, but in 2019, we were up at 4 degrees near the bottom. So that's one of the things we're seeing is very warm surface water previously in 18, 19, and now 19 and 20, we're seeing that in the deep water also. For Rebecca's, if she's online, she can answer. I'll just briefly go over this. So her cruise was on the Norseman prior to when we were on, and she did this from the 18th to the 18th of September. This was a crew only deployment of her mooring arrays, and they will have to pick them up next year. Due to COVID, that was there were no scientists on board for that, but they used the internet. So she was directing from land too. I did a similar thing for the Norseman, for the Dyson back in August, and they deployed those moorings at the usual sites. They also were able to do the marine mammal mooring on the northern Bering Sea, deployed a glider that I think Kate's going to talk about. We picked this up on the Norseman 2, and then they were able to do run full surface temperature and salinity by the flow through. And then the process of doing this next year. And you can see the underway surface salinity on the, particularly the underwater on the western side, picking up that fresh water in the coastal system, going up, running the line. So it was very interesting activity and joint between the crew and the science party. So for the Korean part, this came up from Eugene Yang and Sung-Ho Kang. I'm proud to say that Sung-Ho is the new president of COPRI, the Korea Polar Research Institute, as of August of this year. They were out on the AON. You can see they're looking at the loss of sea ice, particularly up in the Chukchi borderland area. And as part of the Synoptic Arctic Survey, they actually went out into the basin region. You can see on the right there. They collaborate with the many partners within the Pacific Arctic Group and welcome any continued discussions about that. But they're looking at the warming atmosphere, the changing ecosystem, and that loss of sea ice using the AON that's pictured here. You can see their time series for 210 to 220, the number of CTDs increase, XCTDs, and the period of time which they normally go out, which is usually in July and August. So this year they started, as most all the cruises that went into the Arctic this year, they started in their home country. So they started out of Incheon. And then this time period, August 4th to 31st is when they were actually in the Arctic. They came through Bering Strait. You can see they did the DBO3 line, then shot up to the Chukchi borderland. They have, they normally would put ice camps out, but there was no ice. They had 4 transects. You can see the stats here, 88 CTDs. They recovered and deployed moorings. They had expendable XCTDs as well as the use of their CCDs. And you can see what they processed, went through here. You can see the locations of the moorings. And honestly, maybe somebody else could tell me, but I don't know what the CPIs are. But there they are. And then the yellow is their SAS transit. So that's the Synoptic Arctic Survey. They did physical oceanography. This is traditionally what they do on their cruises, dissolved oxygen, velocity, chemical parameters that you can see on here, nutrients, looking at also at runoff and using oxygen isotopes and sea ice melt, something that we also do within the DBO. Biological oceanography from phytoplankton, a lot of alloeutrophic community structure, grazing process studies, mesozooplankton, bacterial abundance. They also looked at ichthyoplankton and eDNA. So they've included eDNA in their sampling too, and looking at larval fish and the plankton food web. So if we move on to the morai, and I would just point out these PAG that have more detail, they will be posted, and I can let you all know when those are posted on the PAG website so you can see more specifics on what they did on these cruises. Shige sent these are the morai crews that they left, actually left from Japan in September, returned in November. And so they did not stop anywhere in Alaska here. They came through this line. They did the DBO3 up in this region here, worked up on along the slope area here into the marginal ice zone, went up to the borderland region, and then came back down. So they also did CTDs, XCTDs. They looked at, they were doing plankton nets, grabs, bioacoustics. They had a mooring here at the B4. They have a sediment trap, which is the deeper sediment traps, like a Hanzhou one in up on the borderlands. And then this is the DBO5 that they did as part of their study. And then one thing they wanted to show, this is the NOAA ice chart. So everything they did, the closest that they got to the ice, as you all know, it was pulled back greatly this year. It's the second lowest, highest sea ice retreat into the basin on record, behind 212. And then they did all of this in open water, although they saw the beginnings of the ice on that one station. And I think that's all. I'm happy to, there's a lot of agencies in the US that support the research that was done. You can see the acronyms NOAA, NSF, NPRB, BOEM, NASA as part of the DBO program, and then the EcoFoci, AMBON, and the acronym soup that I've been mentioning, CEO. But I want to thank the international partners because we do get together and have data sharing, and we have a special issue that we're working on for PLOS One. So that'll be coming out. We do have a new DBO website I would point out here. And then this is the PAG portal. So that's it.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yep.
I'm going to hold off on questions because we are down to the last 20 minutes. If people can stay a couple minutes longer, that would be great. But I'm going to try and hand it over to Kate so we can get through that. And then if anyone has comments from anyone outside the strict research cruise community, people, you're more than welcome to speak after, but I'm going to hand it over to Kate so we can move along.
Okay, great. Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Do you guys see a
we see just a title.
Okay, I'll be really quick. Jackie mentioned that we had the glider both deployed on Rebecca's cruise and picked up on Jackie's cruise, and for that we're very thankful. So the Whale Glider project is a collaboration between myself, Mark Baumgartner of Woods Hole, and Seth Danielson and Hank Stachowicz at UAF. And this has been ongoing since 2014 and has been funded annually by AOS. And the glider itself was obtained from NPRB. And so essentially, not unlike what Bob Foy described for the wave glider, our glider is autonomous. It goes out, does little dives, and sends data back in near real time via Iridium. The unique thing about the whale glider is that we also have a hydrophone on board. And so in near real time, we get acoustic detections and classifications of marine mammals in the Arctic. So some of the things we've been able to determine over the past 5 years, and on the left you see the glider tracks from 2013 to 2018. And on the right, you see all of the detections of killer whales we've had during that time. And you'll notice that in general, we try to deploy just north of Bering Strait and then attempt to zigzag up to Utqiagvik. Unlike the wave gliders, undersea gliders are, they don't have a lot of oomph in that they tend to be victims of winds and currents. So for instance, in 2017, you can see we did a giant loop because the winds shifted from the east. At any rate, what we get from these data, in addition to marine mammal detections, are your standard physical oceanography. We get temperature, salinity, density. We also get chlorophyll. And from that, we're looking at changes onshore and offshore and from north to south in the summer in the Chukchi Sea of the oceanographic environment and how that influences the suite of marine mammals that we hear. Like all of you, 2020 was and still remains a little bit challenging. Normally we deploy the glider at the end of June or early July. Due to almost exclusively COVID issues, we couldn't get it in until September on the Norseman on Rebecca's cruise. And when I put together this presentation, the archive data still hadn't been downloaded from the glider. Turns out Hank has just been able to get into the lab and is starting that download now, so that's great. Nevertheless, we were able to get the glider in, again, thanks to Rebecca, and get the glider out, thanks to Jackie, much later than we would have. And the glider was deployed 2 months later than usual and recovered after only a month. The nice thing about this particular glider is it has an endurance of almost 4 months. So normally we go from Bering Strait up to Barrow Canyon every year. This year it was much, much shorter. So the glider was deployed on the 12th of September and recovered 27 days later. So we really managed to look at, for instance, the DBO3 region, and then you can see where we turned it back to meet the Norseman so that Jackie could pick it up. Very preliminarily, and these are data that we get in near real time, you can see chlorophyll, turbidity, temperature, and salinity with the date on the x-axis. And essentially what you're looking at is this point starts at the little green line and the end starts where the glider was deployed. So effectively we go from more or less offshore up to the northeast towards Point Hope, head offshore by Cape Lisburne, and then turn around again. So we'll get these data. We'll look at water mass composition. We'll look at overall temperature. We'll compare it to the past years with the caveat that we are basically in the same region about 2 months later than normal, which should be kind of interesting. And then we'll get the acoustic data, which are not sent as actual wave files through the Iridium, but are sent as detections. Once we get the glider back, we get all the raw data. But what was pretty interesting about this year, and this may be because we were out later than usual, is we got a lot of fin whales, fair number of killer whales, and killer whales certainly seem to be expanding their presence in the Pacific Arctic. And then also a fair number of walrus, even further south than we normally record them. And that might be because of the late time of the year that the glider was out. So our next steps, as I said, are to download the data. We will upload it to the AOS website, refurbish the Demon because it's been out for quite a few years now. And of course, as we've all been talking today, start planning for a full survey in 2021. Our hope is that we can actually fly it through Bering Strait next year. We had planned to do that this year, but because of COVID, that wouldn't work. AOS provided a tremendous amount of support and money to the UAF glider lab this year. So we were able to get a thruster put on the glider, which means that when we get in tricky spots, which can occasionally happen, we'll be able to get out of them better in the future, which expands the ships we can deploy from and recover from and the overall capabilities of the glider. And that is all I've got for you today. Thanks. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kate. I just quickly wanted to point out that I think we're going to skip the last point of the agenda with the research cruise update. I'm going to share the website link so you can all access it. And I am planning to send out a survey asking for information on whether you received the research cruise update and whether the information that we provided was useful and the frequency was useful and whether it reached the correct people. If you want to make sure you get the chance to fill out the survey, and I'm hoping that I'm reaching every one of you, send me an email and please feel free to distribute the survey so we can reach as many people as we can and can make sure that next year when we're doing this again, we're including the correct information. But I'll share all that information in the chat in just a minute, and I'll include it in the notes as well. But I want to make sure that not only the POCs for the research cruises are getting a chance to talk, but also some of other stakeholder members. So if anyone, I know that Gay was online earlier. If you have a couple of things that you wanted to say, or if anyone else wants to speak up and share anything, now is your time.
Hi, this is Gay Sheffield in NOAA UAF Alaska Sea Grant. This has been really interesting to me, and hearing all the news. I guess I just wanted to say, I'm on the agenda for community, and I have questions about what that even means. But I did want to say that Molly started this with, the people on the coast are the first responders. And I've been thinking about that as we've been talking. And I do want to say that the public of the Bering Strait region are, when they are reporting, when we're all reporting, it's primarily, especially in the coastal communities, people are responding primarily to food security issues, right? If there's something wrong with the environment, if there's something funny with an animal, that is a immediate concern, not just a conservation concern, but a public health concern, an individual concern, a population concern, an ecosystem concern. And so I don't think there's anyone in the Bering Strait region in the public that has any question that we are in a big transition, or we're certainly at an ecosystem level responding to events of this warming water, loss of sea ice, loss of the thermal barrier, or certainly weakening, fish are coming in, industries coming in, all kinds of shifts are going on. So as far as what was the most unexpected, knowing that we were going into a COVID-laden year where it was awful to see all the research ships having to cancel, and NOAA was just sort of like, holy cow. I would say the most unexpected thing to me was I thought we'd be contacted more by researchers. We were contacted, and I thank all the people that normally contact us, the people with the Ice Seal UME, some of the steady cruises that are constantly coming through, and the people that have always tried really hard to reach out to communities. Thank you for that. I just thought we might see more as people realized how are they going to get information, or how can they supplement what little information they could get. So that was just really, that's an interesting thing for me. And then I think I'll just say that this region was able to, I don't know how to do it. Like, I don't have a big chart or anything like that, but how much information was provided from this region, not just by me, but by this region. And it included everything from the weather and all that involves, to water temperatures, to the river, people from the fish side of the house, people from the algae side of the house, marine mammals, of course. All those, there was a lot of data that was going out because of course we're seeing all kinds of crazy stuff here, from erosion issues to pollen events at sea to what were the other ones I had? Biogenic oil fouling event, foreign marine debris event. We had so much action in the Bering Strait region, and it involved the military. That was also unexpected. And so I guess I would just say that this region continues to provide to an enormous amount of state, federal, university researchers a whole bunch of information. We will continue to do that as a region out of concern, out of wanting to collaborate. And a big thank you to those who did communicate and reach out to the region. And I think, you know, right now we've got the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council meeting going on. And I just want to say a shout out to NOAA, and Elizabeth Seiden just did the Bering Sea ecosystem, what do they call that? ESR, status report. And so she's trying to put it all together. I think they did a nice job of trying to capture using a lot of local information. Shout out to a lot of the people on this meeting here. We will continue. We did about 20 straight sciences. That's a public presentation series here in Nome. We do it virtually now because of COVID. And we are pushing that information out through a variety of ways, all working collaboratively from the transportation hub of Nome to the coastal communities throughout the Bering Strait region that don't have the bandwidth or the ability to, or the time to deal with every single project. So, and it looks like, a shout out to the Alaska Fisheries Science Center and their communications director. It looks like we're going to have a lineup for 2021. And I encourage people to, if you don't want to do the straight science, reach out to our local media. That's it. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak up.
Hey, Gay, this is Molly McCammon. Is there, is there anyone else from the region who wanted to add something here as well? And then I want to ask you a question after that.
Hi, Molly. This is Corey Sequoia-Kirkson with UIC Science, and
Hi, Corey.
more or less representing the North Slope side of things, but you know, that is my home neck of the woods. So thank you, Gay, for representing our region back home. I just wanted to acknowledge that and say thank you to the marine scientists who have contributed to the more positive relations with the local communities, especially with AWC and others. I think we're at a much better place than we were, you know, for instance, in times past. So good job to the scientists who have been very careful and responsive, and also very flexible with their planning. I know that some research has definitely been sacrificed for to consider the local concerns. So good job, everyone out there, and look forward to continuing these positive relations. I know it won't always be easy, but I think we are in a better place than times in the past.
Thanks, Corey. And there was a comment in the chat from Rosemary Achangaruk, concern at how temperature change to the west affects our fisheries on the east, and how the concentrated threats strongly continue and expand their reach farther north and east and west. So thanks for that, Rosemary. Any other comments here? And so I guess my question to Gay and to Corey would be, and I know from UIC Science, but Gay expressed concern that she thought there'd be more researchers reaching out to them. And I think there was concern by a number of people that they knew things were so uncertain in a lot of the communities that they didn't really want to disturb the communities even more due to COVID times, just because of all the concerns with health issues and travel restrictions and all. So, but I think there is growing capacity among all of the communities for providing this science, and also doing more local workforce on behalf of the research community. And Gay, I was wondering if you plan to do any kind of a summary report with your collaborators there in the region, kind of the results of what you described today.
And what would the objective of that be?
I think the objective would be to share with the research community that that there is capacity in the region for scientific support and scientific input, and just to make that more widely known, and to provide the contact information.
I think that's a discussion for a different time, and I think it has to deal with regional communication networks. And I think who would benefit from that report versus, I just don't really kind of understand what you're asking, other than you'd like contacts and a list of what we saw, or the organizations that we provided input to, or.
Yeah, thanks, Gay. You're probably right. This is probably more a deeper subject that requires more conversation. So I was just wondering if you were preparing any kind of a report summarizing what you described here, but yeah, that could be for another time.
Okay,
But,
I know that there's a lot of researchers, academic, agency, and we're talking on multiple levels. I often think maybe that when people are from far away from a region and they're not familiar at the regional level, understandably so, they're not here. They don't know the complexity or the existing communication networks. And I think that asking or having someone try to parse that out is like trying to ask Western science at the federal end or the state end. Can you parse out how this works? It would be tremendous. I think there needs to be more understanding and education of each of how research works, and maybe how regional communications work, and all the different reporting mechanisms and discussion mechanisms. For example, we have in the region, Corey, speak up at any time here. I'm trying to just sort of describe that complexity in a region. People may not understand if they're looking for information. We have Board of Game meetings. We have Board of Fish meetings. We have Rural Advisory Committee meetings. The North Slope Borough has North Slope Borough meetings, public, with minutes and things recorded. And we have co-management entities, and we have, meetings with co-management organizations like Eskimo Walrus Commission, Polar Bear Commission, Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission, so Ice Seal Committee, blah, 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 on and on. And I don't know if people know that those entities exist, or if those are ways that people could better integrate in. Just some thoughts on the difference in maybe understanding or knowledge of complexity within different regions regarding comms. Hope that made some sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gay. Was there one more? Was Bob Pickard going to do anything here today, Anne, Christine, or
yeah, we had reached out, but unfortunately the time change that we had to make didn't work out with his schedule. But I asked for some slides, so if anyone's interested in a report back from that specific cruise, I'll post everything on the meeting. The meeting website.
All right. Any other comments from anyone? I know we are running past our time, and any thoughts about further collaborations, further preparations for the spring? We'll be talking to everyone too, kind of the feedback from this and how we can do better preparations next spring. Any closing comments here, observations?
This is Jackie Molly. I just think this is good, and I don't know what time you plan to have the next one, verbal one, but we have the next PAG meeting where we talk about all our potential cruises for the Ford coming in March at the Arctic Science Summit Week. So if prior to that, I can start polling our Asian colleagues.
That sounds great, Jackie. I think we will be looking. I think it will be likely either before that or just right after it. So we'll be polling people too and seeing when's the best time for that, for the planning. So yeah, thanks. Any closing comments, Candace, or I think Roberto had to drop off? Anyone else?
Just a quick comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Richard. I'm with the Yukon Kuskokwim Subsistence Advisory Council. I appreciate, just even though this is last minute for me, I appreciate this kind of information and listening in because a lot of the stuff from the Bering Sea in our seas, that because it's our lifeline, that it's important to us. But just wanted to point out that before this thing came on us, we're attending a lot of our meetings in the areas of subsistence through teleconferencing. And because of the climate change, that has been, even traveling to our face-to-face meetings has been a challenge. And then overnight, food security became a matter of concern because this thing has been on us, and even securing our food out here in the villages. Safety to travel to secure these food is now our food, traveling to conduct subsistence activities is because of the climate change and the change of weather and having where there was once permanent ice is all ice flow, and safety is now is of concern. And I appreciate everything that has been done, but it's also that a lot of times we don't understand or know who's doing what in our areas, especially when subsistence is an important, is our lifeline, and it would be nice to know who's doing what, and then we can let our people know that these people are out there. And it's for the most part, a lot of these research reports never get to any of our people. So, and then there's so many researches that have been coming on because there's more traffic out in the Bering Sea because there's no more ice, and so traffic has expanded. And so for the most part, a lot of us, even when we try to keep up with who's doing what, a lot of these researches, we don't understand who's doing what, and then we hardly ever see any of these reports. So when these researchers are coming on, it is also important to include the people that are out there, traditional knowledge, local knowledge, people that are seeing firsthand of what's going on in our areas, especially out in the Bering Sea and on our rivers. So it's also. I'm just saying that it's important to include traditional knowledge, local knowledge, because we're the people that are out there, and we're also could be of great contribution. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Richard, for that. Appreciate that. Any other closing comments? Okay, well, hearing none, I want to thank you on behalf of the other IARPC team, collaboration team co-leads. Thank you all for joining us today. And as Anne-Christine said, all of these will be put on the website and made available. And we'll be talking further about how to prepare for next year. So thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Talk
Thank
to you
you.
later. Bye-bye.